rural communities will be wealthier, but how do we make this change? And we can't just leave this to the people who are on the ground. So.
Yeah, I love that sentiment. Yeah, why are the producers taking all the risk? And I think there's no magic business model that we've seen. Some things that we have seen are a lot of people talking about alternative ownership structures and how to structure your business to secure the mission of the organization and take care of the stakeholders and all of the employees. So sometimes that's a cooperative, sometimes that's employee stock ownership program. We recently worked with a company called Organically Grown Company. It's a large organic produce distributor in the Pacific Northwest. And they just changed their ownership structure into what is called a perpetual purpose trust, which is had been experimented with in the UK, but hadn't been done before in the United States. And it's essentially locking in the mission of the organization into a perpetual trust, which allows the owners of the business to retire and feel like the mission is baked in. It's not going anywhere. Even if employees change, the perpetual trust will keep it and in perpetuity. And that was really interesting. And I think there's a lot of different ways of thinking about how to structure businesses. That doesn't really relate to farmers as much, but I think that cooperatives of farmers or whatever. I think it's a really interesting model. But I mean, yeah, we see a lot of challenging business models in the work that we do, and sometimes we feel like our loans helped them, and sometimes we feel like the loans maybe didn't help them. And I think that's a sad reality, and something that we are kind of struggle with is, what if our financing actually didn't provide any support? And I think that's a reality too.
Yes, my greatest fear has always been to make a loan to someone and they are worse off afterwards than they were before. Yeah, that's terrible.
Yeah, one of the things that that I'm discovering in our work is that, for those of you guys on the ground who are producers, particularly in the pastured livestock industry, it's really, really hard. And so we've invested in a couple of regional, what we call regional models. So basically, one producer in the region, has sort of the passion and the skills to step up and say, hey, let's get together, kind of like the Grassroots Cooperative in Arkansas. Let's get together and jointly market our product under one brand. And so, the folks that we've worked with, typically it's about 10 or 12 in a region, have gotten together to market their product under one brand. And so, we're seeing a little bit of traction with that. And then the other thing, Will also alluded to this earlier, is we're just finding it's really hard to work with mainstream grocery stores. And so many of these models are working direct to consumer. They're selling their stuff directly to the consumers through various channels. And so, it's higher margin for the business. So they don't have to pay the distributors, the middlemen that, take their stuff to the grocery store. But I think that model is still a little bit untested, right? There's still a lot of missing infrastructure out there for that. And so, I got asked just last week on a panel about, how do we make this go mainstream? And I just thought, what? What? Like mainstream, we've already done that. We've tried that business model, and that business model does not work for small producers. So maybe we need to find sort of the next stream, not the mainstream. But in finding that next stream, to the point that you were talking about earlier, Sallie, is just sort of we're missing a lot of the infrastructure in between the producer and the consumer and how to get it there. So that's just a piece that we're also just looking out for. So one last question up here, and then we're going to let you guys ask us some questions. I think one of the... sorry, I just lost my train of thought for a second. Sorry. Okay. Well, so I think before we sort of wrap up the onstage portion of the Q&A, I would love to hear an element of hope. Like, what gives you hope in doing this work?
So it's biology and photosynthesis give me hope. I think it's we as humans have really lost sight of the amount of energy and help we have if we just will work with nature. She's so much more powerful than we really imagine, and I just can't wait to see what can happen as we learn more and as we really figure out as we change our mindset and we figure out how to partner with nature. I just think the amount of energy and possibility, we can't imagine how good things could be. And I'm an eternal optimist, I admit it.
I think there's a lot of really fascinating, interesting work happening on the ground with producers and with cooperatives and with these businesses that are trying to challenge the paradigm. So that's really promising. And then I think there's also a lot of movement happening in the capital space about, especially in philanthropy, people like Sallie's organization, No Regrets Initiative, that are taking like people call it the one pocket approach to thinking about using their investing and their giving in combination to support initiatives. And I think philanthropy has a lot of work to do to shift their way of thinking and how they run their separate investment house, and then they have their grant side, and like oftentimes they don't talk and they're in conflict with one another. But there's a lot of conversations happening about how to line it all together, and I think that can really support the movement, is when we can have philanthropic money like coming into the space at a more in a good way, structured, not for doing well, but for having impact.
Well, I know I get super excited just by the individual people who show up to do this work. It just every day inspires me. So thank you for all the great work you guys are doing on the ground. The other thing is that gives me hope is a little bit of math, actually. So there's this math that I keep up on the magnetic whiteboard in my office, and I just scribbled it out on a receipt, on the back of a receipt, actually. But having been to different talks and listening to different folks out there, particularly when it comes to the connection between regenerative ag and carbon sequestration, I took some of the more optimistic numbers out there. So, for example, Colin Seiss in Australia, who has really pioneered some pasture cropping techniques out there, has measured up to 10 tons of carbon per hectare per year sequestered. And so I've seen that number range from between 7 and 10. Most real scientists will tell you a more conservative number would be, 0.5 tons of carbon per hectare per year. But I'm going to go with 7 to 10. And then on the cropping side, I've seen numbers that range from about 3 to 3.5 tons of carbon per hectare per year. And sorry, I know it's hectares, but that's the numbers I'm working with here. And so if you take sort of the IPCC numbers that we've got about 3.5 billion hectares for grazing globally and 1.5 billion hectares for crops globally, that means if we did the most amazing work that we could, and if we could sequester 7 to 10 tons of carbon per hectare per year, we could go back to 280 parts per million in 7 to 10 years on grazing lands alone. And if you included crops, if you just did crops, it would take 49 to 57 years, which is actually not that bad of a number either. But if you combine them both, and if you do both of them to the most excellent possibility you can, we could sequester enough carbon to go back to 280 parts per million in 6.5 to 8.5 years. And that number gives me hope. So, I don't imagine by any stretch that that's going to actually happen, because, there's people on the land who may not be willing to or are able to do that level of work. But that's the potential. That's the potential of what we're working with. And to me, that is so exciting. So with that, we have a few minutes to take some questions from the audience.
That's all based upon IP and trying to verticalize and control markets and their role in the, in all of the juggernaut marketing model that they have. It tries to undermine a more regenerative model. So
the question was, do we sometimes feel like David versus Goliath? And And yes and no. In a way, yes, in the sense that like it's so amazing how much money gets thrown away via venture capital. In the venture capital model, really, they're looking for 1 out of 10 companies to win in their portfolio. So basically, they're just throwing 90% of that money away in order to achieve a really high return. But a lot of money, capital goes into venture capital, goo gobs of money. And we definitely can't compete with that, but we also choose not to. So in a way, we feel like we're just operating in this kind of parallel world next to them, and don't bother with them. One of the things that we do look out for when we invest in a company is, does this company take venture capital, or will it take venture capital? And if the answer is yes, we will really take a hard second look at whether or not we invest in that company, because we just don't like the energy that comes along with that. But yes, with all that kind of capital, the companies that receive that have enormous resources to really push product out there, to gain market traction. But at the same time, like, I think consumer tide is shifting a little bit.
And we're not really. I mean, and they just have a lot of money and think they know the answer to everything. And we have biology and all of the people like you in the world. And I actually think we are more like Goliath. It's just at the moment, it doesn't look that way.
If you were going to design a project that would most be seductive to you, what characteristics would it have?
Well, so we're doing our own project on the ranch, so we get to do that. And that's kind of where we take that approach. Outside of there, we really look for the people more than the project. So for us, it's really about who are the people driving this project, and it has to be about soil health. But it's really about the people, not about the project. We don't want to be the guys who have. I don't want anybody to come to us for funding thinking they're going to do something to get money from us. We don't like that at all. We really want to support people who are doing the thing that they are passionate about, and we want to support that. We don't have anywhere near all the answers, so.
Same thing, yeah.
Oh, goody. So there was a woman just recently elected Prime Minister of New Zealand, elected while pregnant. And in her first week of office, she announced the planting of 1 billion trees, which is good because there's a lot of airplane travel needed for the New Zealand economy. And the administration of that project then went directly through the Primary Industries Department of Forestry and approached landowners saying, we'll pay you to plant trees. And I felt in that story kind of an emblematic question, which is, how do we structure these regeneration projects such that they incorporate youth employment? And how could the many young farmers that I'm familiar with benefit from a job that paid $800 a day that's not firefighting or cinematography, and do work that's not crisis or Hollywood, but do work that's restorative, hydrology, erosion control, afforestation, et cetera, as a side gig in the countryside? And I feel like that doesn't apply just to this 1 billion trees in New Zealand. It applies to kind of the potential new economic framework of restoration overall, and the potential for many different kinds of enterprises fitting together in ways that are unusual to us as yet in our history in this country. The end. Reflect.
Well, Severin's questions are always intriguing. I guess what I would say is that I think it's really about changing the mindset of how like government and a lot of big institutions work in the world. We're about dealing with problems. I mean, this year, in the first 6 weeks of fire season, California spent $450 million fighting fires. There's a lot of money that is being spent to stop problems. And if we took a holistic management framework and we said that rather than fighting against the problems we don't want, we figured out what we do want, which is healthy ecosystems, and we applied the vast resources that we have all over the world, I think we could create good paying jobs. We would have to have good paying jobs because it's going to take a lot of people to do that. So I think the money is there. It's a matter of changing the mindset and thinking about restoration as a primary cause in the world. And I don't know how do we change billions of people's minds? I don't know.
I don't have the answer to that. But yeah, I mean, separately from sort of government sources of funding, I think one of the things that I feel very passionately about is really, making these business models work. And so if we can make the business models work, then we can hire people to do this work. We can provide livelihoods and jobs for young people. And, we're super excited by things like, the Herd Fellows program. Really excited to see all the young people in this room. And so we're trying to foster more of that, more interaction between, some of you guys who've been doing this for a really long time and know your stuff, and helping the young folks, come up alongside, because, none of us last forever, right? So we got to keep continuing to put in the pipeline. I think we have time for one more question. Yes. I'm not familiar with regenerative enterprise. Are you guys? Okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar with it. Oh. Regenerative enterprise, he said, was Ethan somebody?
Ethan Rowland. And Landau just wondered how much you guys' work was connected with that. It's a short book published about exactly what you guys are discussing today. Thanks.
Yeah, we'll look into that. Yeah, thanks for that reference. Okay, I think that's all we have time for one more, she says. I think there was one back there. Yes. Yes, in the hat.
Thank you all three for bringing the financial end out. And so I just wonder, do you, Sallie, in your dealings, do you, when you talk to other like people, or is there some single mindset that you can work on, bringing more people like yourself together? Because you know that you're dealing with a $30 trillion stock market valuation, and that's your ultimate competitor. And the second thing is, as a small investor myself, I have no way to invest in this. And if you look at what's out there in social investments, it's not really very social. So I think if you could kind of address those two aspects.
So I think to the first question, which is, do we work with other investors to get to the same kind of mindset? And the answer is yes, and there's a lot of change happening in the investment community. There are an awful lot of people trying to figure out how to do socially responsible investing. And of course, the definition of that goes all the way from not terribly meaningful to extremely meaningful. And right now, to be honest, there's a real problem. Once people get to the point where they really do want to do something meaningful and impactful with their money, it is very hard to figure out how to do that. It's changing. There are getting to be more opportunities. But I think there are, at this point, more people who want to do that kind of investing than there are really good and meaningful opportunities to do that. So it's a challenge that all of us are facing. And we do spend a lot of time talking to other investors and philanthropists and talking about what regenerative agriculture is and how money can be helpful or destructive. We really have to think about both of those things. Like, it's very important to me to keep that this work builds wealth in communities, not wealth at Goldman Sachs. We've concentrated way too much of the money, and as we make this transition, we need to make that not happen anymore. And I've forgotten your second question. What was the second? Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's also been a big problem. I mean, with the crowdfunding, the bill that was passed a couple years ago that enabled crowdfunding makes that somewhat easier. And all I can say is there seem to be an awful lot of people trying to create funds for smaller investors, and it's really challenging in the current regulatory environment. But there are a bunch of people working on it. The thing I notice is it's taking a lot longer than people think it's going to take, it seems like, to get those things approved. Do you have any?
Well, I could plug RSF, our investment fund. So our investment fund is open to anyone in 47 states in the U.S. For $1,000 minimum. So it's a way to democratize the impact investing space, which is often only for accredited investors or people that have at least $250,000 of liquidity. So, RSF has an investment fund. A lot of community development financial institutions, CDFIs, they're doing a lot of really great work, and so you can move your money there. You can have deposits at some of those institutions, and they also have investment funds. Calvert, there's a lot of interesting opportunities for individuals that, like you or me. And I was also going to say, the direct public offering thing. A lot of organizations are fundraising through their community. And so if I forget Jenny Kassan's website, but she always has a bunch of different opportunities out there for people to invest in specific projects.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Let's give them another warm round of applause. Esther, Sallie, Meredith, thank you so much. I have a few announcements, and then we're going to take another break, and we will come back. It always helps to look at the right announcements. I think I'm looking at the wrong announcements, but I'm going to do my best anyway. So I want to talk a little bit about the dinner this evening. If you have a ticket to that dinner, there are 2 ways to get there. You can walk. You should have been emailed a map. You can also ask at the registration desk for that map. There will also be a shuttle. It'll be a big turquoise school bus that will pull up to the front of the hotel that you can get on, and it will run to the Old Town Farm. If you don't have a ticket and you want to go, I'm really sorry. We are totally at capacity for that event. I will work really hard next year to make sure that we have more seats. Again, thank your sponsors. I wanted to call out a couple of our sponsors because Esther and Sallie have, among other things they've invested in this event and our organizations, and we're all really grateful to them to help us do the work that we do. So I'd like to thank Piscinus Ranch and the No Regrets Initiative. I'd also like to thank the 11th Hour Project, the Thornburg Foundation, Grasslands Charitable Foundation, Owl Peak Farm, Tomcat Ranch, Applegate, the Dixon Water Foundation, the Lydia B. Stokes Foundation, Nancy Ranney and the Ranney Ranch, the Regenerative Agriculture Foundation, Audubon Conservation Ranching Program, Dennis O'Toole Family Foundation, Old Town Farm, Panorama Organic Grass-Fed Meats, Martha Records and Rick Rinaldi, Rocky Mountain Farmers Union, RSF Social Finance, the Taos Ski Valley Foundation, the CS Foundation, Heart and Horn Ecological Services, the Union Land and Grazing Company, the Animus Foundation, Pat and Mike Boring, Central Colorado Education Trust, Nancy Darren, Farm Credit of New Mexico, Grassburger, Merrill Lynch Bank of America Corporation, Preservation Ranch, LLC, Solution Strategies, Vermejo Park Ranch, Molly Baldridge, Tamara and Kurt Gadzia, Bronwyn Griffiths, and La Montanita Co-op, and among other folks, all of you, because being here is an investment in this event also, and so thank you all so much for being here. Let's take a break and come back in 30 minutes.